So here we are, week two, and what we're going to talk about today are business messages. And this is the written format of business messages for the most part. And the reason we want to look at this is because some of you are college students coming, are still in college and you're taking this course either as a summer or an online. And others of you are actual business professionals who probably write business emails all day long. I still think even though you might be a business professional, you can glean some information out of this deck. And if you're a college student, writing for business and writing for college are nowhere close to the same thing. So it's an important deck for us to look at. It's an important topic for us to cover because even seasoned professionals can use some help with their business writing. So there are a couple of key differences between business writing and personal writing or college writing. In business messages, we really want conciseness and clarity. That's what counts, not the number of words, not the flowy language. Actually, flowy language can obscure the message and make the message more confusing. So we want to be clear and concise. Everything you write for me in this semester will be less than a page because candidly, that's what most business professionals will read, less than a page. So somehow you have to find a way to be clear and concise. Second, we don't double space in business, we single space. We double space between paragraphs, but we single space, for the most part, all of the documents that we do in business writing. And we don't indent. Indentation is usually reserved for personal writing, not for business writing. So there are a couple of major differences, and once you get used to them, you absolutely love it. The reason why you double space between paragraphs in business writing is because you're single spacing the paragraphs, and so having that double space allows you to have a little bit more of white space. And white space is important for a reader because it allows them to center themselves and find themselves in a document. There are four major principles that guide business writing or good business writing. The first is that there has to be a purpose. If you don't have a reason for writing an email to somebody, don't write it. If you don't have something I'm supposed to do with that email, don't send it. So there has to be purpose. The second is it has to have something to do with persuasion. And persuasion, by this we actually mean, you have to want me to do something with this information. Do you want me to just be informed? Do you want me to transfer it? Do you want me to act on it? What do you want me to do with it? Persuade me and tell me what to do. It has to be economical, right? There should be not brevity of words. That's not what we're looking for here, because it still has to be complete and thorough, but just not an abundance of words that don't add to it. And then it has to be audience oriented. That's a very key issue in business writing. We don't write the same way to our boss that we write to our peers, that we write to our subordinates. It's a different style of writing for each. To my boss, I really have to be brief. I have to lay it out. I have to be brief because he's not going to read the entire thing. My subordinates are likely to read everything that I write to them. And my peers, it takes more persuasion than it does anything else. So I have to know who I'm writing to, and I have to make sure that I gear or arrange my document in accordance with the audience that I'm trying to get that to. All good writers have an approach. It might be a little different for each of us. Some people pre-write as they write. They don't really pre-write. They don't sit down and think about what they're going to say. Instead, they write and they revise as they go along. Some people, they think it through, they organize it, they bullet point it, and then they put it together in a written format. I don't care what your system is as long as you use a system. And then after that, the conventional wisdom says the second time you read your document, you're reading it for content, and the third time you're proofing it for errors and mistakes. I don't know about you, but I have to go in the opposite direction. I got to proof first, and then I can read for content because I get jumbled up when I see mistakes in my own writing. And I'm very fast fingered, so a lot of times I will make mistakes. I guarantee you there's probably mistakes in some of the writing that you see that I've done. And that's just a function of the fact that I miss it, because I know what I was planning to say. So there has to be some kind of a process that you go through when you when you write. You can either bullet point or pre-write, or you can write and revise, whatever works for you. Make sure somewhere along the line you're doing all three steps. You're writing, you're proofing for content, and then you're proofing for spelling. All right, so now analyze your purpose and your challenge. Why are you writing the document? What do you hope it will accomplish? And then what do you want the person to do with the information? You also want to look at your channel. I'm going to cover that a little bit further in this deck, so I'm not going to cover it right here. It's the next slide. But I want you to understand that, it isn't always the appropriate method to send an email. That isn't always the best thing to do. So first, identify your purpose. Every piece of information is appropriate to be handed off through email. You really need to think about which channel you're going to use. Some people have gotten into the habit of using email to avoid face-to-face communications. They do it because whatever it is they want to talk about is, in their eyes, easier to convey in an email, but that isn't always appropriate. Sometimes picking up the phone or walking down to somebody's office is more appropriate. And we shouldn't use digital means of communication as a way to avoid having confrontations or conversations with people. So think through how you want to deliver the message before you actually deliver the message. So when you're deciding which channel is the best channel, there are a couple of things you should keep in mind. First, how important is the message? If it's really, truly important, and there was an immediacy to my need, I would usually walk down to somebody's office and have a conversation. How fast do you need feedback? Some people don't read their emails when they hear that ding. Some people read them every couple of hours. So depending on how quickly you need the feedback or how quickly you want a response to whatever you're sending may also dictate the channel in which you use. I'm finding today more that if I want an immediate answer, text is really the way I have to go. And about 65% of my customers like me to text them as opposed to sending an email because they don't read their emails as often as they do their text. So if I want a faster result and it's with a customer or my boss, I usually will text. Also, do you need a permanent record? If you need a permanent record, usually you have to do something in writing. So you may still have a conversation and do a follow-up in email format, but if you need a permanent record, especially if you're dealing with HR or you're dealing with, I used to be on a board of selectmen, and we oftentimes would deal with things about property, and we had to have permanent records of everything that we did. What's the cost of the channel? Some channels have a cost associated with them, especially if you're going to send it by mail or registered mail. There might be some formality that's needed, like a contract, where you have to send an actual handwritten, where they have to hand write their signature and not just DocuSign or digitally sign. How confidential or sensitive is the material is another reason you would consider a different channel. If something is confidential or it's sensitive, you have to be very careful what you do, because everything you write can be forwarded. And when you talk about people, especially HR, you talk about, their personnel records, you have to be very, very careful what format that you use in order to convey the information. Think about profiling your primary audience. Who is the reader? Who is the person you want to read this document? Again, if it was my boss, I would really pack it in the first paragraph and the first and second line of the second paragraph, because I found he was a skimmer after that. He would skim everything from the third line of a second paragraph down, and he would skip right to the bottom to see if there was something he was supposed to do with this email. So I got really good at kind of making sure that my email was short enough that he would read the entire thing. What's your personal and professional relationship with the person you're sending to? Because you have to be careful. If you don't have the kind of rapport with the person you're sending it to be informal in your style and in your approach, then formality may be something that you want to make sure that you have in there. obviously if it's my boss, it's a little bit different because he's my boss, and I know him really well, and I can certainly send uh, information to him and not feel like I have to worry about my relationship with him. What does the person know about the subject? That's really important, because if you're going to send information on a topic that they haven't been briefed or covered yet, email might be a really challenging way, because you're going to have to put a lot of information in there. We're going to talk about direct and indirect methodologies in a minute, but when I have to bring somebody up to speed, instead of just forwarding them an entire stream that they have to go back and read, by the way, I hate when I get that, go back and read, I usually try and encapsulate everything in there and then attach an email that has the stream, so if they want to go back and read it, they can. But I don't want to require them to do that. And uh, what kind of response should you expect? You have to make sure that you understand whether the audience that you're addressing this to can give you the response that you're looking for. The only point I really want to make on this slide, and I know I've said it before and I'm probably going to say it again, is be careful with your messages, because they can definitely be forwarded, especially email. It's very easy to forward an email message. And I worked for a company that monitored not only our email messages, but they also monitored all of our text and our IM. I worked for an analyst firm, and we signed a lot of non-disclosures with clients because we worked with people at very high levels, and we knew a lot about their products and a lot about their financials and what was going on with them. And so we were very closely monitored. Everything that we said, everything that we emailed was very closely monitored. And I was very cognizant of the fact that anything that I wrote today could come up a year from now, 2 years from now, when somebody was looking back at whether we knew something or didn't know something. So I was very aware of that and very conscious of it. And I was very aware and conscious of the fact that it wouldn't be unusual for somebody to forward an email that I sent. I think that that's about all I want to say on the subject. Is you have to be really careful, and you have to be understanding of who else might see the message. When you're sending a message, when you're calling, when you're texting, whatever you're doing, remember that there has to be a reader benefit. What's in it for the person who's reading it? If they're just reading it so that you can feel like you covered your bases, that's not a good enough reason. It's not about you, it's about your message, and there has to be something in it for the person who's reading it. I can't tell you the number of times, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way, that I have received a stream of emails from somebody who CC'd about 20 people in the company, and I'll go back and read the entire stream and realize he's just covering his butt. I didn't need to be on it, I didn't need to read it, and I certainly did not need to get the entire stream. There was no reader benefit in it for me. It was maybe a sender benefit, but that's not what your message is about. Your message is about the reader. And try and use the yes, no, yes approach. Be positive when it's possible. Obviously, don't sugarcoat things, and don't be positive if that's not the case. But good positive language goes a long way to getting somebody to read your message. Words have hidden meanings, and you have to be very careful with the message you're conveying with the words that you use. You have to think twice about using negative expressions. You have to think long and hard about things like, he said that, but, because that leads people to believe, but I didn't believe him. You have to be thinking about what it's like for the person who's reading it and how they're going to take it. People can get very easily defensive if they feel that you've got a hidden message or a hidden meaning in what you're saying in an email. So be careful what you say, because emails, unlike the face-to-face or even over the phone, have no other cues for the person to go off of other than the words that you put on the paper. If I walk down to somebody's office and have a face-to-face, they get to see my body language and they get to hear my tone. If I call them on the phone, well, they don't get to see my body language, but they certainly get to hear my tone. In an email or in a letter or in a text, all they have is what you write. So make sure that your words convey what you're trying to accomplish and don't have any hidden meanings in those words. Think about it before you send it. Couple of quick reminders that, plain English is not bad. I don't know how it got a bad reputation because it's really, plain simple English is the best thing to use. It ensures that your message is clear and there can be no misunderstanding. Be inclusive. Messages can be forwarded again, so be careful what you write, or make sure if you are seeing somebody that there's some benefit in it. Focus on the problem, not on the personality, and that goes for reading it as well as sending it. Don't think about the person you're sending it to. Think about the quality of the message. And from that perspective, I certainly mean you have to think about them as the audience, but don't think about their personality. And make no assumptions. This year in my on-campus class, I was teaching this course, and one of my students got up and he talked about the GOAT, Tom Brady. And he kept saying, the NFL, the GOAT. And I had 7 or 8 students from China in there. So at the end of his presentation, I asked my students from China, uh, what do you think he means by the NFL? And they had no clue. And they're too quiet to ask, and that happens a lot. People will tune you out as soon as there's something that you made an assumption on that they don't understand, and they won't ask you. So always make the assumption that any letters that you use like that, any acronyms or initials that you use like that, need to be explained the first time out. Don't assume that everybody who is reading your emails or who's on a phone conversation or who's watching a presentation understand all of that. Always explain it out and be clear and concise, but don't be so short that you're not complete. There's just a couple of tricks that I want to have a conversation with you about. The first is that email is a good form of business communication and it's still widely used, but text is gaining in popularity because of the immediacy of the format. But just because text is gaining in in use does not mean that you can be really informal in that medium. You still need to have some level of formality. You still need to use good, concise, and complete information so that people get the entire message. And I don't want you to think that because email is so easily prevalent and a great form of communication in business that you can use it to avoid when you need to have a face-to-face or phone conversation. And I'm seeing this a lot in business where people should be having a face-to-face conversation in certain topics and they're avoiding it. And the way they avoid it is just to pop off an email or send a text. That's inappropriate. Business still requires you to have those difficult conversations when necessary. So don't use email in inappropriate situations when it really warrants you doing a face-to-face. And then this is for fun. So I get asked a lot, I don't know whether I should add an S to my verb or not add an S. So there's a trick to it. If your subject is singular, like the word he versus they, if your subject is singular, then your verb is definitely going to have an S on it. He studies in the library, right? If your verb is plural, they study in the library. So when you're using a singular subject matter, then you use a S at the use an S at the end when you don't the opposite direction. So again, he studies at the library, they study at the library. Just a simple little tool in case you ever wonder and get stuck. And I'm going to teach another one in another deck on how to determine whether it's who or whom.